Story 1. I love how the comments are either that the couches are not pushed right up against a wall or that the place is like Versailles with a private airstrip. Story 2. A copy of Architectural Digest magazine with their house on the cover. Story 3. A wall-length, built-in, floor-to-ceiling saltwater aquarium is being maintained by a scuba diver inside it. Story 4. My friend's dad was an oil tycoon. He had a Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton in his hallway. Story 5. No full street address. Just the name of their house, Hampshire. Story 6. I was driving to their house and trying to find the side street off the main road when the global positioning system said, "You've arrived." But I saw no house. I made a U-turn and realized the side street was actually their 0.4-mile driveway. This was in a wealthy suburb where million-dollar homes are common, but none of those houses have driveways longer than the street I grew up on. Story 7. A Monet in their office. The penthouse apartment with a direct view of the Empire State Building was also a pretty big giveaway. Story 8. A friend invited me to his family farm in Argentina for the holidays. I was driving, it was a long trip. At one point we turned onto a dirt road that seemed endless. 40 minutes in, I asked when we would get to the property. He looked confused and said, "We have been on the property for the last 40 minutes. The farm was about 100,000 acres. Story 9. I was friends with a kid in high school. His parents had a new house custom built. A huge house with custom woodwork and beautiful details throughout. It was very expensive. I used to go over to hang out with him, swim in the pool, and watch movies in their theater. One day I walked in and there was a brand new Steinway grand piano in the living room. His mother said she wanted to learn to play the piano, so they bought one. I play the piano. Steinway pianos are amazing and sound wonderful. Each Steinway is handmade in only one of two places in the world. They are like the Rolls-Royce of pianos. That piano probably cost over $100,000, and they bought it just because she wanted to learn. Story 10. While visiting friends, my wife saw a bronze sculpture of a cowboy on the coffee table and said, "Gee, that looks like a Remington." Our hostess replied, "Yes, it is." Story 11. They built a second house next to theirs with a bridge over the driveway connecting the two, so their two children could have a house of their own and not bother their parents. A different friend had his wealthy next-door neighbors buy his parents' house and demolish it to create a larger yard. Story 12. I was driving to a classmate's house for a school project. I drove up and knocked, but no one answered. I called and she picked up. I explained I was at her front door. She said, "Oh, you're probably at the barn. Keep driving up the hill. You'll see the house." By house, she meant a chateau. It turned out her dad was from Switzerland and owned several construction companies. Their house was featured on the show Grimm, which was filmed in the Portland, Oregon area. They were very kind, and I became like an adopted son. I loved house sitting for them. Story 13. A college friend had a thick Southern accent and a country boy vibe, though he lived in the Maryland suburbs of the District of Columbia. He invited us to his parents' house on the border of West Virginia so we could go skiing at Snowshoe. We assumed it would be a tar paper shack. The three-story wall of windows overlooking 300 feet of frontage on Deep Creek Lake made it clear he was not the country boy he appeared to be. On a sad note, I am going to his memorial party on Friday. He passed away in a freak home accident on January 3rd. I have known him for almost 40 years. This is the big get-together of his college friends. His funeral was small and family only. It will be a party because he inspired that. More than 100 close friends are expected to attend. Story 14. There is art at the front entry. You open the door and a Picasso painting greets you. Not a print, an original. Family friends were wealthy in the 1980s. She collected paintings, drawings, statues, and sculptures, and had great taste. They are now very old, sold their houses, and have given most of the art to their children and other family members. They had an abstract sculpture of a woman's head I loved as a child. The two sides looked completely different, very cubist, and I thought it was a Picasso like the big painting. Years later I mentioned it was my favorite sculpture. She asked what Picasso I meant. I said the woman's face, the square one. She replied that it was not a Picasso. It was by a local artist she had bought at a local gallery because she fell in love with it. That did not matter. I still love it. Today, it is in my living room on a rotating plinth. She remembered. Story 15. They bought 2 apartments and turned them into one large unit. Walls were torn down and plumbing was modified. They also had a room with separate temperature and humidity control that was used as a wine cellar. Story 16. I work in real estate and sold a 4-story warehouse to a man. He was really laid back and paid about $600,000 for it. I told him I wanted to come back when he remodeled it. About 18 months later, he called and said he was finished and invited me to come by. The first floor was full of exotic cars and it had an elevator. The top floor was his master bedroom and the roof was his patio. This was the greatest bachelor pad I have ever been in. Story 17. I used to deliver food to a man who lived in a mansion. His family owned a propane company and a bank. The first time I delivered to his huge house on a mountain, there was a gated driveway, and he had a life-sized knight in the entryway when he opened the door. I thought this man had money. On a different delivery, he gave me a $53 tip on a $47 order. It was the best tip I ever got. Story 18. I grew up poor and always thought the epitome of success was someone who had an ice maker in their refrigerator's freezer. I am now 45 and living in my first house with an ice maker. It is awesome. Story 19. The 64-count Crayola crayon box with a built-in sharpener. Story 20. When I was a kid, it was a bidet. Now that I am an adult, it is a La Cornue range. Story 21. Aside from the indoor hot tub, heated floors, and movie theater, the 24-foot ceilings and grand entrance really did it for me. Story 22. A stone brick walkway surrounds their property and includes an iron gate. Story 23. This is silly, but I went to a boss's house for a team party. The whole event was catered by their private chef. We went downstairs to see his whiskey collection and tried a bottle unearthed on a man's property that dated back to the Civil War. We each had about half a shot, basically a sip. Then we went to his garage, which was full of pinball machines and arcade games. I half-jokingly asked where his Ferrari was because I knew he owned one. He straight-facedly said he parks it in a townhouse across the street because his driveway at this house is too steep and the car bottoms out. He was a very nice and generous host, just extremely wealthy. Story 24. I was bartending a July 4th party on his outdoor rooftop bar, with bottles of champagne that cost $300, Miller Lite, obscure Sonoma Valley Reds, and pricey tequila. After the party, I was breaking everything down. He came out on the deck to hang out and was using a solid gold weed pen. We shared a beer and the pen. He casually mentioned, as if it were a minor detail, that the glass windows in the house cost $2.5 million. This was his beach house. He was not the wealthiest person in the neighborhood, and one neighbor had a painting by Vincent van Gogh in the living room. Story 25. They bought meat from the butcher for their dog. I cannot afford meat from the butcher for myself, yet they served a ribeye fillet to a Maltese terrier. Story 26. I attended the private high school that the extremely wealthy kids in a major United States city attended, even though I was not wealthy. The most ostentatious thing I saw in a friend's home was a full-sized vintage race car in the guest house living room. Story 27. I worked on a summer home that cost $3 million. I did the ventilation work for a house that sat on a cliff by the ocean. The house was twice the size of an average home and had an infinity pool that was heated year-round. Mind you, it was in Sweden, where winters can be quite cold. I do not want to know the cost of keeping it heated all year. The chandelier in the main hall cost around $20,000. There was not a single sharp edge on the house. Every wall was curved in some way. Story 28. When I was young, I thought anyone who had central heating, air conditioning, and carpeting was rich. Story 29. Their kitchen appliances are disguised to look like cabinets. Story 30. My husband, as a child, used to think that if someone had a banana hanger, they must be rich. I got him a banana hanger one day for his birthday and said, "You made it, babe." Story 31. The first time I walked into my brother's airplane hangar, which was attached to his house at an airport, Story 32. 24-karat gold Gucci door handles open the penthouse that overlooked a famous Professional Golfers Association golf course. I had been flown in on their private jet and picked up in their Rolls-Royce limousine. My driver wore a cap, a tuxedo with tails, and white leather driving gloves. Like in the movies. I was treated like a princess over a long weekend. It made it difficult to fly back to my measly apartment, change into my nursing whites, and work a 12-hour night shift the day I returned. All of that happened because I had cared for a family member who had been hospitalized. They wanted to thank me for my compassion and care. I did nothing extraordinary. I simply cared for a rather sick grandparent, the same kind of care I hope my own parents or grandparents would receive if they were hospitalized. Story 33. The 6-foot-long dinosaur fossil in the entryway. Story 34. Indoor water feature, as in a small artificial brook with stones to walk across. Story 35. A bedroom with an en-suite and a separate study nook. It was not the master bedroom. Story 36. His grandfather's greatcoat, dinner jacket, and dress shoes were all meticulously maintained and well used. The house in question is a 15th century manor, and the accompanying land comprises a significant portion of the county. He claimed to be rather poor, yet he had a cellar of fine wines and a safe of diamond jewelry. Story 37. A girl invited me over to do homework at her huge house on a large property. She asked what I wanted to drink, and I said Diet Coke. She pointed to an intercom I had not noticed and told me to press the Diet Coke button. There was a Diet Coke button on the intercom in every room. I pressed it, and her butler brought a Diet Coke upstairs in under 5 minutes. She also had a Hot Pocket button in her room. Wild. Story 38. There was a signed Warhol soup can in his college apartment overlooking Fenway. He was a nice guy from an extremely wealthy family and never mentioned any of it until you noticed. Story 39. A label that read for official use only. Do not reproduce appeared on an otherwise unmarked digital versatile disc. It was a movie that had not been released yet and was expected to be nominated for the Academy Awards. It made me realize that my friend's mother was kind of a big deal. Story 40. The DeLorean in his garage was a hint, but the huge amethyst crystals in his living room, easily $25,000, served as a trinket and underscored it, not to mention the original Picasso on the wall. Story 41. I looked up the address on Google Street View before I arrived and saw a row of pretty swanky townhomes. When I got inside, I realized they were actually one giant house. Story 42. A happy family. Everyone is content, with clean clothes and plentiful food. I am not saying that every wealthy family is happy, but having money does remove many life stressors. Story 43. A fence is often the best indicator in rural areas. A steel pipe fence indicates wealth. A wood fence suggests upper middle class status. A wire fence suggests a family trying to get by. Story 44. A former girlfriend's bathroom countertop with gold and Swarovski crystals and a Japanese toilet. Story 45. When I was a kid, I thought the family up the street were rich because they always had a big jar of pistachios. The large house and pool were an even clearer sign. Story 46. They bought the top 2 floors of a newly built tower for high ceilings and added a 5-meter glass box balcony. No other apartment has a balcony. Story 47. My wife and I were talking about things that used to indicate someone was wealthy but are common now. The conversation started because we installed closed-circuit television cameras around our house. If I had seen that in the 1990s, I would have thought the person had money. The same goes for large televisions. Story 48. When I was a little kid, my sister was friends with a girl from a wealthy family. There were multiple Christmas trees with presents under them and a large walk-in closet full of more gifts. It was just 2 little girls and their parents. The girls had so many presents to open that they started on Christmas Eve and finished the day after Christmas. They became bored with opening presents and just wanted to play with the toys they had already unwrapped. Story 49. A wine refrigerator the size of my kitchen. Hey, thanks for the award, stranger. Story 50. A restaurant-size ice maker on their patio in the Florida heat was always running and full of ice. Story 51. I used to apply pesticides and only worked outdoors. I kept multiple emus as pets. Story 52. A free vending machine in their billiards room. What is this, a game of Clue? Story 53. There was Aesop soap in the guest bathroom, but not in the original Aesop bottles. It was a nice house, not extravagant. The man was a car guy with a handful of older cars he was working on. He seemed well off, but nothing that screamed money until I went to use the bathroom. Have you ever used hand soap that just felt expensive? I asked what it was. I looked it up later. It is about $50 a bottle. Who spends that for the hall bathroom? I could not imagine what they had in the master bath. Story 54. I went to high school with a girl who once casually mentioned, while we were at her house, that the large bone on the wall was a mammoth femur her dad had insisted on buying from a museum by offering an obscene amount of money the museum could not refuse. I have no way of fact-checking this, but it seems so random for a teenage girl to make up that we all believed it, and they became the richest people we knew. Story 55. I befriended the staff of a yacht docked in the marina in St. Thomas, United States Virgin Islands. They had sailed the yacht from Europe, and the owners were scheduled to fly in a few days. I visited them on the yacht one evening. On the living room wall was an Andy Warhol portrait of the owner's wife. Story 56. When I see large designer-level kitchens with every amenity you could imagine, yet nobody in the house actually cooks, that is rich. More than one couple we know fits this description. Story 57. Anyone who uses summer as a verb to refer to a home. Oh yeah, it's a nice place. We summer here. Story 58. It was either the jeweled egg or the 13th century woodcut Bible. Both were in museum-quality glass cases in their library, which was larger than the house I grew up in, and that was a clue. I briefly dated a girl whose parents were very wealthy. Her father founded a company you have heard of. It did not work out, but I could have been retired by now if it had. Story 59. There was nothing in their house except what was on their father's wrist, a Patek Philippe. Story 60. I used to clean houses 10 years ago, so some of this may no longer be true, but these are my observations. There were landline phones. Typically, there was at least one cordless phone on every floor. Wealthy people are pretty old-fashioned about many things. For example, they often had analog clocks instead of digital ones. A guest bedroom they never used often had its own bathroom. There were many small framed pictures in every room and lots of knickknacks that would break if you so much as looked at them the wrong way. They would panic if they thought you scratched a stove or another stainless steel appliance. Stuff like that could ruin their day. I never once saw a desktop computer. They were often convinced their house was a disgusting mess when it was actually pretty much spotless. Our office was located directly across from a homeless camp. It was jarring to go from seeing that to being in a house with 6 full-size bathrooms. Working there made me realize that wealthy people live in a completely different world from the rest of us. Story 61. I used Google Maps and drove to a place that essentially looked like Downton Abbey. There was an authentic Rodin on the side table. I walked around with my hands clasped behind my back. They made a great martini. Story 62. I was told their fence cost $3 million. It enclosed 3,500 acres. Story 63. Their house has a distinctive smell. When you walk in, it is not full of mold, pet dander, or other strong odors. Every house reflects the people who live in it, but wealthy houses smell different. The scent is a mixture of fresh flowers if visitors were expected, cleaners from the regular cleaning crew, and whatever air is drawn in through the outdoor intake. You can be rich and still have a house that smells like its occupants, but families wealthy for multiple generations with trusts to preserve their wealth will never have a musty smell. Story 64. Everything is customized. The doorbell, the statues, the garages for multiple cars, the size, and the security system. Story 65. I went to my fiancé's parents' best friend's home for dinner. I walked into a spectacular copper-filled chef's kitchen with every accoutrement imaginable, complete with a very large open wood-fired oven and a huge natural wood-burning fireplace. Then I realized I was only in the side kitchen, not the main kitchen. Story 66. When I first visited a friend's house, they had a tram that ran from the backyard to a small private beach owned by their family. Story 67. Gorgeous huge bouquets of flowers are casually placed around for no reason. They are not for a holiday or a birthday. Story 68. A white Christmas tree. Only rich people had one. I became rich on Sunday when Amazon delivered mine. Story 69. I grew up near what is now Silicon Valley in the 1980s, so we knew many of the original dot-com tycoons. My brother's friend lived in the house originally built and owned by Bob Swanson, founder of Genentech. The house was so big my brother got lost and had to call for help on the intercom. You know someone is very wealthy when guests have to call for help to find their way out of their house. Laughing out loud. Story 70. I can't compare to most of these homes, having grown up and now living in poor areas, but the richest home I walked into felt luxurious. I don't know brands, but every wall had perfectly placed custom artwork. All the furniture was either real leather or plush fabric. There were sculptures in nooks and decorations arranged just so. The master bedroom had an odd-shaped giant window and custom-fitted blackout shades that looked great. The host casually served us a $50 steak that was grilled perfectly, but he could not cook much else. He loved my homemade baked goods and practically inhaled half an angel food cake. Story 71. These comments made me realize that I am even poorer than I thought. Story 72. One time I saw my friend's dad who gave him a hug and said, "I love you." I don't know if they had money, but to me they were rich. Story 73. After reading these comments, I have never felt poorer in my life. Story 74. Large floor-to-ceiling glass windows run along the wall, with high ceilings. Story 75. The look on their faces when I mentioned I thought it was cool they had a his and hers toilet. I peed in their bidet. Story 76. A massive Renaissance-style oil painting of the family hangs in the foyer. Story 77. In high school, you can be friends with someone for years, visit their house hundreds of times, and only meet their parents a couple of times, if ever. Story 78. Their home. When I was in elementary school, I visited a classmate's home. Their living room was larger than my parents' entire house. The garage held 6 cars, and the swimming pool was bigger than our living room. The kitchen was as big as our living room and kitchen combined. The house faced the Pacific Ocean, and the entire front was floor-to-ceiling windows. I never went back to that house. I also remembered that my mom used to clean houses. I went with her one day to a house she regularly cleaned. In the living room, they had an indoor koi pond with a bridge over it and a fountain at one end. The pond was made from black quartz and black marble slabs. Story 79. They have a poop knife in every bathroom. We used to have a single communal one. Story 80. When I was in Eastern Europe, a family I was visiting to have papers drawn up had built a 12-foot tall brick fence around their 40-acre property. I couldn't even see the main house because we met at their gatehouse. Story 81. It is what you did not see. From the road, it looked like a well-paved driveway. The only way to tell you were in the right place was that all the electrical lines went underground about 1.5 miles before the driveway and did not come back up for another 1.5 miles. You could not see the house, and apparently they had the power lines moved out of sight. Story 82. He lives in a ski resort and enjoys smoking cigars outdoors and being barefoot. He had a heated floor installed on his balcony or terrace, so he can smoke barefoot outside even when the temperature is -5 degrees Celsius. Laughing out loud. Story 83. I could not find the refrigerator. It looked like just another cupboard. Story 84. Smaller and less affluent, but the house is perfectly clean. No clutter or mess. It looks ready for a magazine shoot. Keeping it that clean permanently shows they have time to spare. At the level I grew up, having that much spare time without a second job meant they were rich. Story 85. A refrigerator with an ice dispenser. I am pushing 30, and I will know I made it when I have ice on demand. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.